Hey guys, so this week I was going to do a Tome Topple TBR video, but instead, seeing as Stan Lee has now passed, I wanted to do a video that honoured him. So I thought I would do a video all about my favourite moments from the Marvel comics. And even though none of these were actually written by him, I still feel like this is honouring him because without him, none of these comics would exist, so none of these moments would exist. And so I just thought it'd be a really good idea to just talk more about my favourite comic book moments and talk about how much I love Marvel Comics and as well as the cinematic universe. I mean, I've always will love the cinematic universe more because that's what I started with, but I love the comic book universe as well, and I just want to talk more about it because we've lost a legend and it's horrendous and I'm really quite emotional about it. So I wanted to talk about it in a video and sort of share my love with you for Marvel Comics and hopefully convince a few others to read these comics and maybe have a bit of suggestions in there if you want to get into the comics. So the first moment I'm going to talk about is not precisely a moment, it's more of a sort of theme for the entire comic, and that is Doctor Strange the Oath, and the theme that Stephen really cares for Wong and he will do anything to protect Wong, and I really love that of this comic. It was the first Marvel comic I ever read, so it will always mean a lot to me anyway because it was the first thing I'd read of the Marvel comics, so it was sort of like my gateway into this world, so I'm really happy that that was my first one. Wong and Stephen in the comics are very different from their film counterparts. Wong is definitely Stephen's manservant in the comics, which is an outdated and horrible ideology based on quite a lot of racism from the time when Doctor Strange was created. But in this comic, Stephen proves how much he cares for Wong, and Wong to him isn't just his manservant. In this comic, Wong is Stephen's best friend, and it shows how far Stephen will go to save Wong when he needs to. And it was such a great theme running through it. I absolutely love seeing that. The second one I'm going to talk about is Loki, Agent of Asgard Volume 1, and that moment is going to be when he quotes the Princess Bride and when he sings The Wizard and I from Wicked, because I am a huge fan of The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride is one of my favourite classic films of all time. I adore it. It's everything. I absolutely love it. But also, apart from that, I love Wicked. Wicked is my favourite musical that I've seen on stage. If we're talking about musicals in general, it's The Greatest Showman. But when it comes to stage musicals, Wicked is just everything. So when Loki starts singing The Wizard and I in the shower, I thought that was just absolutely brilliant and absolutely hilarious, and I absolutely love that moment. It was my first Loki comic and it definitely drew me in, and it was just brilliant to read because it just combined so many things I love. It combined Marvel, Loki, Princess Bride and Wicked. I could not have asked for more. Next I'm going to talk about House of M because I can't help talking about House of M, but in House of M, the no more mutants moment. Need I say more? No more mutants and the mutants disappear. I love the mutants. I've been X-Men trash since I was a tiny child, and I cannot remember a time when I did not absolutely adore the X-Men, because the X-Men came out when I was 3 in the movieverse, and I can't remember the first time I watched it, but I remember watching it from about 7 or something. That's like the earliest I remember, but I was pretty sure that's not the first time I watched it. But anyway, I love the X-Men. I have loved the X-Men since I was a tiny child. And so when I saw No More Mutants, even though I knew it was coming because this is such a huge, famous comic storyline, it was still shocking. And it was still really, like, I gasped out loud when it happened. Even though I knew it was coming. I thought it was coming earlier in the comics. So when it did come, I was a bit like, oh my god, it's happening. It's such an iconic moment from the comics, from the entire Marvel universe. I'm desperate to see it on the big screen. I couldn't not put it on this list. I'm sure it's going to be on a lot of people's lists, but this moment just was incredible. Then similarly, on the same note, in AVX, I liked the circular moment where it went back to the No More Mutants, but it changed to No More Villain, which I won't say in case you haven't read this. This is the last one in the House of M storyline before it goes into Axis, which is a bit more of the aftermath of it, but the no more villain, I'll just say villain for this, was just such a circular moment, and it brought it all back to the House of M bit. And I mean, there were so many outstanding moments in this comic, but that moment just really stood out to me just because it was sort of bringing everything full circle again, and it was absolutely brilliant and outstanding, and I really want to see it on the big screen if possible. Please, Kevin Feige. Then I have to talk about 1602 because I can't go a video talking about Marvel Comics without talking about Marvel 1602, because up until I read House of M, this was my favourite comic. It was one of the first comics I ever read after The Oath, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But the moments I loved the most were the reveal moments of certain characters who have been hidden through most of this comic, and then they were revealed. So in this comic you have Doctor Strange, you have Peter Parker, Nick Fury, Daredevil, Natasha, people like that. They're very much out in the open in this with their powers, but there are a couple of characters in this who are hidden until quite near the end, where you don't know who they are until a certain thing happens, and then you're like, oh my god, that was that person all along. And while it's obvious for some characters after you get past the reveal, others took me entirely by surprise. I won't say who took me entirely by surprise, because this is such a great comic. I want you to read this for yourself and get shocked yourself when you read it. But those reveal moments literally had me screaming with joy when they happened. There were moments where I nearly cried in this, but those reveal moments were just everything. I screamed, I cried. It's just, this entire comic's brilliant, but those reveals really made it for me. If I'm completely honest, the reveals were everything. I couldn't go this entire list without mentioning the Deadpool Spider-Man team up, and for me, my favourite moment of this comic, apart from when they go to Hollywood and you see like Ryan Reynolds and the X-Men and things like that in Hollywood, because that's just fun for me because it's fourth wall breaky and I love the films. My favourite moment was when Spider-Man and Deadpool went to see Batman v Superman, and they took that subtle sly dig at Batman v Superman while not saying Batman v Superman. It's just a really fun moment for me because I've always been diehard Marvel. I used to really love watching Teen Titans when I was a kid, but Batman v Superman just is not a story for me, and seeing them take a sly dig at it in its total Deadpool kind of way was just brilliant, and it was a highlight for the comic for me. And lastly, I couldn't go this entire thing without talking about Laura Kinney in The Four Sisters, because in The Four Sisters there is this moment that nearly made me cry. For background, I am a massive X-Men fan. As I said before, I've been X-Men trash since I was in single digits. I will always be X-Men trash, even for the films. Even though I know the films are terrible and there's like 80 million timelines, I still really love the films. But with this, I nearly cried because I read this after I watched Logan. Like a year after I watched Logan, the film, and watched Logan die with his heart in his hand, otherwise known as Laura Kinney. And so I wanted to read this to know more about Laura Kinney because I really loved her as a character in the film, and I wanted to see more about her comic counterpart. So I picked this one up, mostly because it was the only one on the shelves, and because Doctor Strange is on it, and I will read anything with Doctor Strange in. What I didn't realise was that this was going to tear my heart out, because there's a moment in this where she's talking to Doctor Strange, and she says that when she wears the uniform, and when she takes on the mantle of Wolverine, Logan, isn't dead. He's still with her. And it includes a flashback to him and her. And then Doctor Strange turns to her and says, your father would be so proud of you. And it hurt my absolute feelings. I was nearly crying reading that. It was an emotional moment for me, more than anything, because Logan in the films was always my absolute favourite from about teenage years. I used to have a serious thing for Cyclops, but I moved on to Logan quite quickly once I hit teenage years and realised Hugh Jackman was amazing. So I moved on, and Logan, the film, tore my heart into absolute pieces. And even though I want to see the X-Men in the MCU, I want Laura to be Wolverine. I don't want a recast of Logan. I just want Laura Kinney to be the Wolverine. And if they have a moment like that in the film, I will cry. Because it was just such an emotional moment for me, being such a big Logan lover and loving just Laura as a character, and seeing someone turn to her and say, your father would be proud of you for carrying on his legacy. Just, it hit. And I think it hits more now after Stan Lee's gone, because I feel like these comics are his legacy. His comics are definitely his legacy, and if we continue to read his comics and watch the films that come from his comics, he's still with us, and he's still alive, I guess. And it just sort of really hit me when I was coming up with this list. This felt so prominent and so important to say. Just, I couldn't not include it, basically. I couldn't not include it, thinking about gone parental figures and keeping their legacy alive. It just felt so poignant, and I feel like it is poignant, so I just had to mention it. And that is all of my favourite moments. Well, not all of my favourite moments. There's a lot of other favourite moments I have from the comics I've read. I'm still very much the comic book newbie, and I've only read like 12 or something, but I've got an entire box full of Marvel comics that I'm planning to just run through and get through as many as possible over the next few years, and just collect more and more and more. But those are some of my top favourite moments of the Marvel comics, and I feel like if we carry on reading the comics and we keep on talking about them, Stan Lee's legacy still lives. So I hope we can talk more about these comics and read more of these comics and get more into these comics and keep Stan Lee's legacy alive forever, because these comics are genius. These characters are genius. The storylines are absolute genius, and they wouldn't have been here without Stan Lee. So I hope we can still talk about these comics, and I hope we can still honour Stan Lee and his legacy by just reading them and talking about them and talking about his genius. I really hope we can. I'm getting quite emotional, so I'm going to go now. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give me a thumbs up. Comment down below with your favourite Marvel comic moments and anything of your favourite moments of Stan Lee. I would love to talk more about these. I'll also leave a link down below to all of my social media, including the link to the Valkyries blog, where they're doing a huge amount of tributes to Stan Lee over the next coming weeks. So if you want to see more about Stan Lee and stuff, go down there. And if you want to see any more of my videos, please click subscribe here, and over here will be the link to my previous video. But until next time, guys, bye and Excelsior.